Okay, so just I know everybody's working. Couple little updates. The YouTube video I had it reloaded. It went from not letting me do the live chat to shutting down. I sent the link out for that in Remind. Not that it really matters, because if you're on ClassKick and you're on the conference call, you can ask questions. You can see what I'm talking about because we're both looking at the same document. The on the high set, you get an hour and 5 minutes for the reading portion. So that's all the reading standards, informational, otherwise known as nonfiction, literature, otherwise known as fiction. You get an hour and 5 minutes for all of it. So to keep with that, in about 13 minutes at 10 o'clock, we're going to stop and then we're going to review it together. Um, and then I'll talk a little bit about why this test is different, because some people think of like, oh, I got 100% or oh, I got a 70%, and that's not really the purpose of the test. So we got about 12 more minutes. So soon as we are done, then we will, and those 13 minutes, we're going to review and talk about the test.
Do we know how many questions we get in the hour and 5 minutes?
It doesn't tell me. I can do some more research on that, but if it's an hour and five, if it's an hour and 5 minutes and they have to give you informational and literature, I imagine that you probably can't get more than like 40 questions, because if they, let's say they gave you 60 questions or something like that, that's a minute per question, and I don't see them doing that. Just because some of the stories you're gonna have to read through, and that's gonna take a few minutes. Let me see if I can find that.
Okay.
And who just joined us?
Hello?
Yeah, someone just joined us. Who was this?
I'm Maria again.
Oh, okay. Joining in. Okay. So we got about 10 minutes and then we're going to come back together.
Okay.
All right. Okay. So let's go ahead and come back together. So I gave everybody roughly the same amount of time that you would get on the test. And that's just to kind of get everybody used to it. I'm gonna start incorporating a clock so that you get accustomed to doing everything with a time limit. So we're gonna come back together. I plan on using mostly what you guys see in ClassKick. I don't plan on doing too much in YouTube if I don't have to, but I know sometimes it's easier to see. So, and before we get started with that, I'm gonna talk a little bit about the way the standards are broken down and how much time you guys have for each. Okay. So for the language arts reading test, this is pretty much the reading section. You have 40 multiple choice questions. And then for the language arts writing portion, which essentially is the same thing, you're going to have two parts. One is going to be 50 multiple choice questions. The other one is going to be an essay. For part one of the language arts writing, which we're going to talk a lot more about depending on how we do on this test, you're going to have an hour and 15 minutes to do the multiple choice. And then for your essay, you're only going to get 45 minutes, right? So this is where we start talking about writing quickly and why everything has to have a time requirement. Any questions on that before we move on?
No question.
Okay.
No question.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. That lets me know that you're here.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay. So I don't want to list out all of the standards, but I'll let you know how many there are. And I'm not gonna write all of them out because I don't want to take too much time away from going over the practice test. But this is going to be helpful when you're taking notes so you know what you're taking notes on. And again, I see that 4 people are on the new YouTube link, which is good. Okay, so under literature, and I might even just send out this as a message as well, like in an email. Okay, so under literature, you're going to have 6 different reading standards. Okay. So you're going to have plot elements, which we're going to see how well we do on those. That's exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, resolution. All right. You're going to have inferences, which there's 2 kinds, explicit and implicit. We'll see if we have to talk about those. Character, which includes character traits and analysis. You're going to have theme, looking at the lesson of the story. You're going to have style and point of view. That's very philosophical, like, and that just deals with the way the author conveys the message. You're still going to have narrative point of view. Doesn't really matter whether it's fiction or nonfiction. Narrative point of views in both. So you're going to see a little bit of that, and then figurative language. Figurative language is in both. Now, again, this is about 40% of what the test is, right? Then we're going to have informational. The other 60%. Okay. So in informational text, you are going to have 16 standards. 16 standards. Okay. I'm going to mention those. They do break them down between analyzing and interpreting, but for the sake of for you guys, when it comes to taking notes and what's going to be on the test, so you understand when you're reading a passage what to look for, here's what it all breaks down to be. Main idea and details that exist in both, but for the purpose of the high set, they consider it to be informational text. Rephrasing and summarizing, that's self-explanatory. Application of ideas. Can you read something, understand it, and then answer questions about a process? Cause and effect. That's text structures, like the way that a text is formatted. Comparison and contrast. Another text structure. Conclusions and generalizations. Right. Uh, that's self-explanatory. Word choice. You're going to be using word choice and inferencing on pretty much every single question. So that's going to come down to your ability to understand a word in the context of the story using context clues. Writer's tone and point of view. That's understanding of a positive tone, negative tone, neutral, um, things of that nature. Text structures, we already talked about that. Reading predictively. You should be doing that now. Reading predictively means you understand the way what the text is trying to prove, and you can actually make predictions about where it's going to go, what it's going to do. I say that's can be a little harder in informational text because if they're trying to prove, for example, that organic food is better for you than food that is not organic, it can be a little hard sometimes to figure out what approach they're going to use. So there's that, but that's going to be a big standard for the test. The purpose of a text: persuade, entertain, or inform. Effectiveness of an argument, which we've talked about, validity of an argument, text related by theme or topic, all of that should be straightforward. Text of opposing arguments, that's probably what your essay is going to be. You're going to read a text, it's going to have two different sides. You're going to pick one and write an essay. Text with related graphic information, that's probably going to be, I would say, at least a third of all the questions you're going to get are going to be a text and then a graph. So those are the 16 that you have. Now, for writing, they break it down into 14 standards, but on the high set, you're going to get simple questions about like what word is misspelled, correct this sentence, and you're going to be writing an essay. I can give you all of that in a lot less than the 14 standards that they name. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into ClassKick. Okay, so we're going to look at, and I'm going to be jumping in and out of yours to see how everybody did. So, we're going to look at number 1. Okay, so which of the following best describes Leroy's wife, Norma Jean? And the correct answer would be C, self concerned. Okay, self concerned. Questions about that? And again, remember, this is going to be directly from the test. So if you don't understand something, please speak up.
No question.
No question.
No question.
Okay. Number 2, by comparing Leroy's truck to a bird that has flown home to roost, the author suggests that Leroy is, and the answer is C, won't be driving his truck for a while. All right, there's figurative language in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep going. And then if at any time there is a question, just go ahead and let me know so that we can get through the review. So once we go through all the questions and their answers, then we'll talk about how you guys did. And then we'll look at where we're going to go from there. And what I'll ask you to do is just to write down your own score on page number 4, right? Obviously, I can grade it as well, but this would make it so you guys have a part in the process. So, number 3, why might Leroy be continually making things from craft kits? And the answer would be D. He doesn't want to consider what to do next. You're going to see a lot of the questions are philosophical. That's why I think reading is harder than math, especially the fiction part, because it's not straightforward, very philosophical, and that can come out harder than the most detailed math question. What can you infer about the boy's decision to climb the rig? And the answer would be A, it took some courage. Number 5, which of the following best describes the boy and the bird at the beginning of the excerpt? And the answer would be B, alone. Number 6, which ideas are most clearly contrasted in this excerpt? And the answer would be D, loneliness and sense of belonging. Number 7, the word blank best describes the mood created by the author in this excerpt. And the answer would be D, triumphant. All right, move on to number 8. What is meant by he endeavored to resume his psalm tune? And that would be C, to start singing again. Number 9. What is the effect of the author's use of words such as dashed, stones flying, and sparks flashing? Number 9. The answer would be A, panic. Which of the following best describes the mood of this excerpt? Number 10. And the answer would be C, suspenseful. Number 11. Later in the story, the narrator implies that the horseman had a pumpkin on the pommel of his saddle. Given this additional information, Ichabod can best be described as blank, given his actions in the excerpt. And the answer would be B, too scared to think rationally. Wow, no questions so far, or are we just tired and from Memorial Day?
I think we're just all waiting to see the results and then maybe after.
Okay. All right. Number 12. So, who does Miss Hale think killed the bird? And the answer would be A, John Wright. Number 13. Based on the excerpt, which of the following best describes John Wright? And the answer would be B, someone who smothers all the joy in another person. Number 14. Which of the following conclusions can you draw about Miss Peters and Miss Hale? And the answer would be D. They understand how someone could be driven to murder. Questions so far?
No question.
Okay, so what I would like you to do is on slide number 4 in the middle, I want you to write how many questions you missed. This lets me know who's paying attention and who's with us.
No.
I think I had the most problems with the very last one.
With the with number 14.
Page 7. Like the whole entire thing, I didn't get not one right.
Sorry. Okay, and because I want to look, because every question relates to a reading standard. So, which question was it?
It was question 12
Question
through
12.
14.
12 through 14. Okay. Okay. So the majority of those questions are about character traits, right? And this is what we know can make fiction reading or literature difficult. Because as we read, we know that one of the reading standards is character, right? Like character traits. So we have to analyze the characters. So the purpose of this is After reading the way somebody acts, or after reading about how somebody acts, reading about how they feel, the decisions that they make, you should be able to predict their character and their personality and what they would do. And that's what number 12 is asking you, right? Same thing with number 13. And that's why they say things like, based on the excerpt, which of the following best describes John Wright? They have to say the excerpt because that is another way of saying the text, the story, the book. And they have to do that because they want to see if, given the information they gave you, if you can judge the person. The best way to do this is as you read and you know they're talking about a character. Anytime they're talking about that character's actions, what they think, how they feel, I'm either going to highlight it or I'm going to write out to the side who the character is. And that can be difficult because, again, we're trying to predict. But if you are taking notes the entire time that you're reading, it becomes a lot easier to manage. Does that make sense?
It does.
Yeah, like if you look at number 12, right? Although Miss Peters insists they don't know who killed the bird, Miss Hale states, and this is when you come directly back to the text, Wright wouldn't like the bird. A thing that sang. She used to sing. He killed that too. I knew John Wright. So this is where we're talking about the way that he's behaved, right? And the things that John Wright is doing, right? So that's
Yeah.
why it's so important when we read to start highlighting, making those predictions.
In this particular one, I was having trouble following along and going with the flow of the conversation because of what they were throwing up, like talking about who did what, covered their faces, looked up, and like all the I couldn't. I don't know. It's my brain, I guess. I couldn't keep with the flow of the situation.
Yeah, and that's going to happen because there's going to be a lot of figurative language. And one of the things that figurative language is difficult, that one of the reasons they like using figurative language is because since it's not straightforward, it's always difficult to understand exactly like what they're saying. And the way they broke up this text, you can tell it was a play, and all of it is just a conversation. So anytime that you take a test and you see that it's people talking, then you know that you're going to be analyzing who those people are. Just like when people will say things like I'm running on fumes, right? Or you're making waves when they're talking to each other and you have to read in between the lines. It's the same thing with these conversations. There's a lot of figurative language. There's a lot of indirect language, right? And you have to in your head as you're reading, look at what the characters are doing, right? Like where they put in the brackets, seeing the bird cage, right? Right in the beginning. Well, that's interesting. I'm sure. Looking at the bird cage, has the bird flown, right? And we know an attorney is saying that. So right out the bat, as I'm reading that, I know there's something wrong with the bird because there's an attorney who's looking at the cage saying it's interesting. So interesting, when I think about a courtroom, that means that something has to be ironic or like weird because you're trying to prove something to a judge, right? Because you're an attorney and you want to win your case. So that already sets the stage that things are going to be off about the bird. And that's where it's so important to really activate your prior knowledge, right? Look at who these characters are. So I know they're in the courtroom and I know there's something wrong with the bird. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Very welcome. Any other questions so far? 'Cause as I'm going through, I haven't seen too many people write up their scores. Okay, good. We got one. Okay. So as I'm going through, okay, so I haven't seen a score from Andre. I'm looking at Caleb. Um, and Caleb's also blank. Okay. So someone's asking about the number of questions that you miss. This is not like a if you miss 3 questions, you get 100%, or whatever. If you miss 3 questions, you get like an 80 or anything like that. Each question is tied to one of the standards we talked about. So what I'm interested in is more the types of questions that you missed, and then looking at the types of questions that you missed as a class, so I know what we need to talk about. So if I see, for example, that we've missed 8 questions, then I know, okay, we need to hit fiction. We need to hit literature very hard. But then I can look at those 8 questions that we missed and look at where we're going to start off in fiction, right? If we only miss 2 or 3 questions and I see that they're all in different areas, everybody's kind of all over the place with those 2 or 3 questions, then I may take what is going to be the most valuable for the test out of those 3 questions because it all relates to reading standards. And that's what we would talk about. So the goal here is for everybody to take charge of their own learning, right? Here's what you missed. We can talk about those standards, and then from there we can move on. All right, so I don't know if Caleb is still with us. Haven't seen anything. And I know some of you guys didn't get a chance to completely start because you joined late. I was aware of that. So some of those, if you didn't actually answer the questions, I'm going to throw those out because that wasn't your actual best effort. And as I'm going through, one of the things that I'm noticing is that character development and character traits has been like one of the most common ones I've seen so far. And then word choice. Yeah, character development. Character traits. A little bit of word choice. And then prediction.